What is the most efficient, cheapest, most eco-friendly, and easiest to install insulation? Basically, which insulation should you choose for your project? Today, we're going to compare 8 different types of insulation, and by the end of this video, you'll have your answer. Insulation materials fall into 3 main categories: bio-based or recycled, mineral, and synthetic, meaning made from petroleum. There are many types of insulation, but I chose 8 of the most common. Among bio-based insulations, we find straw, wood fiber insulation, the combination of hemp, cotton, and flax, and cellulose insulation. Among mineral insulations, we have fiberglass and rock wool. And among synthetic insulations, we have polystyrene and polyurethane. Let's start by determining the most efficient insulation. When I say the most efficient, I mean the one that insulates best against cold or heat. We'll examine 3 criteria: lambda, thermal resistance, and time lag. Please keep in mind that the numbers I'm going to give you may vary depending on the brands of insulation you buy. First criterion: thermal conductivity, also called lambda. Lower numbers mean better insulation efficiency. Second criterion: thermal resistance. Or more precisely, what thickness of insulation is needed for a thermal resistance of R equal to 1. Thermal resistance R corresponds to the thickness of the insulation divided by its lambda value. So the lower the lambda value of an insulator, the thinner it will be. The third criterion is thermal lag, that is, the time it takes for heat to pass through the insulation. We'll see what thickness of insulation is needed for a 12-hour thermal lag, which means excellent summer comfort. Starting January 1st, 2022, all new house constructions will have to comply with the 2020 Environmental Regulations RE 2020. This regulation requires us to use a certain amount of insulation to achieve a minimum thermal resistance. All of that will be handled by your thermal consultant, so consult with your thermal consultant, which will also advise you on insulation and many other aspects. But just so you know, in RE 2020, it states that for your roof, you need to have an R value of 10, and for your walls and your floor, you need to have an R value of 5. That's why it's important to know the lambda value of the insulation, since the thermal resistance equals the thickness of the insulation divided by its lambda. We're going to get to the heart of the matter, and you'll understand this much more easily right away. Let's start with bio-based insulations. Straw has a lambda value of 0.05. That means that to achieve a thermal resistance of R equals 1, you'll need 5 cm of straw. Wood fiber insulation, hemp, cotton, linen, and cellulose insulation have a lambda value of 0.038. So they only need 3.8 centimeters to reach R equals 1. On the mineral insulation side, glass wool and rock wool also have a lambda value of 0.038, so we still need 3.8 cm for R equals 1. And for synthetic insulations, polystyrene has a lambda value of 0.033 and polyurethane has 0.022. That means they only need 3.3 and 2.2 cm to reach R equals 1. If we stick to just these 2 criteria, polyurethane is without a doubt the most efficient insulation, since we need twice as little polyurethane as other insulations for the same thermal resistance. But thermal resistance is not a sufficient criterion to judge which insulation is the most efficient. For that, you also need to add the criterion of time lag. Basically, thermal resistance is the amount of energy that will pass through your insulation, while time lag is the time it takes for that amount of energy to pass through your insulation. A time lag of 12 hours is considered an excellent result because it means that the small amount of energy that still manages to get through our insulation will take 12 hours to pass through. For example, let's say it's summer, it's 8 AM, and the heat is starting to hit your house. Well, the heat will only manage to get through the insulation 12 hours later, which means at 8 PM when it's already cooler. Let's return to the chart and compare the 8 insulation types. To get a time lag of 12 hours, you'll need 30 centimeters of straw and wood fiber insulation. Hemp, cotton, and flax and cellulose are a bit less efficient since you'll need 45 cm and 35 cm to reach 12 hours. Mineral insulation materials are even less efficient, with 60 cm needed for glass wool and 40 cm for rock wool. And it's the same for synthetic insulation materials. You'll need 60 cm of polystyrene and 40 cm of polyurethane to achieve a 12-hour time lag. Let's sum it all up with a little example. If we have insulation made of polystyrene with an R value of 5 and wood fiber insulation also with an R value of 5, both types of insulation protect us from the same amount of energy because they have the same thermal resistance. But the amount of energy that manages to pass through the insulation will take 12 hours to get through the wood fiber insulation, while it will only take 6 hours to get through the polystyrene. So we'll have much better comfort, especially in the summer. And much better insulation in the end with wood fiber insulation than with polystyrene. And we come to the next criterion, one of the most important for many people, the price. But you should already know that saving money on insulation means choosing a good insulation material. Because in the long run, it will reduce your energy bills, so it will be more cost-effective in the long term to pay for good insulation from the start. To get a price estimate, I compared insulators in several different hardware stores, I added transportation costs, and I also checked online on sites like Materio. Naturels, one of our partners, go check them out, they have some pretty interesting offers. There you go, but just know that in any case, you can always find better prices than what I'm going to tell you today. Consider this more as a rough estimate. To get 1 square meter of straw with an R value of 1, it will cost you about €1. For 1 square meter of wood fiber insulation with an R value of 1, the price goes up to €6. For hemp cotton linen insulation, it's €7 per square meter. For serial wadding or loose cellulose, the cost drops to €1.5 per square meter. On the mineral insulation side, it's €3 per square meter for glass wool and €4 for rock wool. And for synthetic insulation materials, expect about €6 per square meter for polystyrene and €8 for polyurethane. Once again, let me remind you, these prices are likely to vary for 1,000 reasons. Different stores, different brands, oil crisis, so synthetic insulation materials are more expensive, wood crisis, so wood-based insulation materials are more expensive. You see, really consider everything I've given you as rough estimates and don't hesitate to keep tracking prices constantly. They change often. Even though these are estimates, we can clearly see that straw is the most economical insulation. Because to insulate our walls, for example, we need an R value of 5 according to RE 2020. To get an R value of 5, you'll have to pay €5 per square meter for straw compared to €40 per square meter for polyurethane. When you see these prices, you quickly understand why fiberglass is one of the most widely used insulators in the world. And you also understand why you often get phone calls offering to insulate your attic for just €1.
Well, yeah, because actually they insulate it with cellulose insulation.
These prices, it's a pretty interesting factor. It helps us better understand which insulation to choose, but you have to be careful because they often hide an ecological cost that also needs to be considered. And that's what we're going to look at right now. Since RE 2020, the carbon impact of your construction has a ceiling that must not be exceeded. It's thanks to the FDES, the Environmental and Health Declaration Sheet, that we can find this information, since every material you use on your construction site has a quantified carbon impact. And if I understood correctly, let me know in the comments if I need to be corrected. But in the RE 2020, the total carbon impact of building your house must not exceed 640 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square meter of living space. So the ecological aspect, you see, the carbon impact of insulation is no longer just a fad for eco-friendly hipsters who want to save the planet. No, it's becoming a regulatory requirement. You have to pay attention to the materials you use so that it doesn't destroy the planet. It's annoying, but it's actually good news when you consider the climate crisis. That's it. The carbon impact of insulation materials is expressed in kilograms of CO2 per cubic meter of insulation. This will complicate things since we usually discuss insulation in square meters, but your building energy consultant will handle the calculations and provide you with the numbers. So, take everything I'm going to explain to you once again as rough estimates to see which insulation is eco-friendly and which one is absolutely not. That's it. Let's start with straw. Straw has a carbon impact of -26. Yeah, that means that for every cubic meter of straw produced, 26 kilos of CO2 are removed from the atmosphere. It makes sense if you think about it. Straw is a plant, so it absorbs CO2 while it grows and then it stores it. Making a bale of straw requires very little processing, so very little energy, and then there's transportation, but straw is a product you can get locally. So all of this combined means that straw absorbs more CO2 than it emits in the process of making this insulation. For wood fiber insulation, the carbon impact is -16. Just like with straw, wood stores carbon and wood can be sourced locally. The carbon impact is probably not as good as straw because it requires more processing steps, so more energy consumption, and therefore, once again, more CO2 emissions. For hemp, cotton, and flax, I couldn't find the exact number, but I imagine it must be between -20 and -5. If you manage to get more information about this, feel free to let me know in the comments. And for cellulose insulation, we have a carbon impact of 4. So for 1 square meter of cellulose insulation, we emit 4 kilos of CO2 into the atmosphere. Yet cellulose insulation is a product made from recycled newspaper. But when you add the energy used for processing and transportation, you end up with a positive carbon impact, which is negative for the environment if you've been following along. So there you have it. Cellulose insulation is a bit worse than other bio-based insulations, but you'll see that it's nothing compared to the rest of the insulations. Glass wool and rock wool have a carbon impact of 20 and 24 kilos of CO2 per cubic meter, so 5 to 6 times more than cellulose insulation and infinitely more than the other bio-based insulations which actually have a negative carbon footprint. And we'll finish with synthetic insulations, which are made from petroleum-based products. So don't expect anything very eco-friendly in that category. For polystyrene, we have an impact of 72. And for polyurethane, we have an impact of 156 kilos of CO2 per cubic meter, which is 40 times more than cellulose insulation. There you go, it's clear and simple. Bio-based insulation materials are infinitely more eco-friendly than petroleum-based or even mineral insulation materials. Well, you didn't need this video to guess that insulating with wood is better than insulating with petroleum-based materials. But if we look at this chart, we might think that straw is the perfect insulator. We agree, but there's still one last criterion that's going to be decisive. It's the availability of this insulator and especially how easy it is to install, which is a pretty important criterion when you're building it yourself. Welcome to the subjective part. Fair warning, I'm owning that. I gave each insulator a score out of 10 based on availability, meaning how easily you could find them in hardware stores, online, or near your home. So there you go, and especially the ease of installation because I was looking for insulators that I could put in by myself pretty easily. So yeah, these are subjective criteria, but the fact that I'm telling you all this in this section will give you plenty of information to make your own choice later on. Feel free to tell me at the end of this video which insulator you think is the best. So what's your favorite insulator? Your fave, as they say. Let's start with straw. Straw is great. Straw is traditional, innovative, eco-friendly, economical, and above all, very effective. Straw is without a doubt one of the best insulators. That's why I decided to insulate my container home with straw, but I had to face two major problems. The first problem is that straw is heavy. To put straw bales on all my containers, I would have had to call in a structural engineering firm again to reinforce the structure. Because straw bales are heavy, this job requires several people. And then, in terms of availability, sure, you can find straw everywhere, but to insulate a house, try finding straw bales of the right size, properly packed, without moisture, and so on. It's more complicated than you think. So I would give straw a score of 6 out of 10 in terms of availability and ease of installation. I eventually had to give up on my idea of using straw for insulation and instead turned to wood fiber insulation because when it comes to availability, it's just not the same. You can find it in all hardware stores, on every website, everywhere. So that already makes it easy to buy and have it delivered. And above all, to compare prices and get the best deal possible, that's it. And regarding installation, wood fiber insulation comes either in flexible panels for walls and roofs, or as rigid wood fiber boards for floors. So, for availability and ease of installation, I have to give this insulation a 10 out of 10. For hemp, cotton and flax, the installation is similar to wood fiber insulation, but there are no rigid panels, so there are a bit fewer installation options. And above all, there's only one brand that sells it, and that's Biofiber Trio. So that means it's not available in many stores. You can't really compare prices. There's not much availability. So for all those reasons, I give it a score of 7 out of 10. And to wrap up the bio-based insulation materials, let's look at cellulose insulation. In terms of availability, it's in every store. You can compare prices, it's great. As for installation, you either have flexible cellulose panels, or you can buy loose fill cellulose and blow it in, or blow it into enclosed cavities using a machine. For loose cellulose, however, you should have two people. One person to fill the blower, and another person to hold the hose and, well, spray the insulation. And keep in mind that renting the machine still costs several €100 per day. So I give cellulose insulation a score of 8 out of 10. Next, for mineral insulation materials, fiberglass and rock wool are very common types of insulation. You can find them in all DIY stores and online. And regarding installation, you'll find them in panels or rolls. And you'll need to make sure to wear protective equipment because mineral wools tend to irritate the skin and lungs during installation. So I give these two insulation materials a score of 8 out of 10 because it's pretty annoying to work with a mask all day. COVID, you know that very well. Let's finish with synthetic insulation materials. As for polystyrene, you can find it almost everywhere, but not always in the size you're looking for. Overall, there are fewer size options for polystyrene panels than for other insulation panels. But the panels are lightweight and pose no health risks, so installation is very simple. So I give it a score of 9 out of 10. And as for polyurethane, you can find it pretty much everywhere. It's one of the most widely used and best-selling insulation materials. Its main advantages are that it's rot-proof, so humidity isn't an issue, and it can withstand heavy loads. So you can put it on the floor, but you can also use it on the walls and on the roof. It's lightweight, it's easy to install. I have to give it a 10 out of 10. In conclusion, obviously I couldn't talk about all the types of insulation that exist. I didn't talk about cork, thin insulation, sprayed polyurethane or cellulose insulation, for example. But I think we've already seen quite a lot, and you'll have enough information to choose the right insulation for your project. Don't hesitate to ask questions, discuss it with a thermal engineering firm. You have to go through them anyway to submit your building permit. So I want to give a big thank you to Evergreen, the thermal engineering firm, who helped me design my project and answered my thousands of questions. So really, work with them if you want to. They're really good. There you go. And for those who are wondering, well, in my shipping container house project, what did I finally decide to do? Well, on my roof, I used cellulose insulation because it was cheap, and to get an R value of 10, you need to put in a serious amount of insulation. So there you go, it was the right compromise. For the walls, I chose wood fiber insulation because cellulose insulation tends to settle. So for the walls, it's not very suitable. And finally, for the floor, I had to use polyurethane because I needed a very thin insulation. So with low thermal conductivity if you watch the video. So because I have limited ceiling height in my containers, I needed a very thin insulation. That's so it doesn't take up too much of my ceiling height. So unfortunately, it's not eco-friendly, I know. But there you go. If you want to look into it further, I've put plenty of other references in the description. So, feel free to go check that out, and especially don't hesitate to add to everything I just said in the comments. Share your experience, share your knowledge. You might know more than I do about many topics. Thank you for watching this video until the end. I hope it taught you a lot of things. I hope that now you know which insulation to choose. I hope I said everything in my script. Yeah, great. Let's go. We'll end the video on that note. See you very soon on the channel. Bye.